Greetings, fellow members of the Esoteric Order of Gamers, and welcome! This is a very special video, and it's brought to you by my wonderful magician level supporter, Joseph Bromley. Hi, Joseph! This is for you, mate, and it's also for all the other people out there who are following the Esoteric Order of Gamers, of course. Now, Joseph, as a magician level supporter, gets to choose the subject of a video a few times a year, and his first choice just came up, and he asked for something about Tolkien-themed games. So I'm going to do a special on the Tolkien-themed games in my collection, culminating, of course, in the most wonderful game of all time, War of the Ring. But first, let's have a look at these. As I looked at my shelves, I realised I had quite a lot of Lord of the Rings-themed games, so let's have a look at them. Oh, but before we get started, you might want to know my own history with Lord of the Rings. This is the edition that I first read as a child, so back in the late 70s. This isn't the actual book, but I saw this in a bookstore, and it's the exact edition that I first read the story in. And you can see it was all in one book like this, big and thick. I was probably about 11 or 12 at the time, and it was a pretty daunting prospect. I'd already read The Hobbit, and then I thought I'd take on the Lord of the Rings, and there's something very special about this particular edition, because it's when I first discovered the wonderful world of Lord of the Rings. And of course this is long, long, long before all the movies and things, even the animated movie, so it was all in my head. I kind of feel a little bit sorry for people who, well, for kids who read it now and have the movies in their head or see the movies first, because they don't get a chance to use their own imagination and coming up with their own versions of the characters. But, you know, who am I to know? They probably do. Who knows? Anyway, there it is. So let's get started on the games, and I'm going to get started with Rainer Knizia's classic, The Lord of the Rings. This is one of the first co-ops that came out, if not the first co-op, I'm not quite sure. And it's a game that takes you through the major events of The Lord of the Rings through a number of boards. Let's have a look inside. The Lord of the Rings came out in 2000, so it's almost 20 years old. And it's hard to imagine now the impact that it had at the time, it being a cooperative game, which was a brand new thing back then. And of course, we've had so many co-op games since then. It's hard to remember that this was a revolutionary concept, something brand new. As you can see, we've got here a main board. This is the one where we have the journey from Bag End to Mordor. We keep track of it on this main board. And then there are these other boards, Moria, and on the other side of that, we've got Helm's Deep, and we've got Shelob's Lair down here, and on the other side, Mordor. And one does not simply walk into Mordor. You have to draw story tiles and resolve their effects. This is my foam core insert, by the way. This doesn't come with the game. So you draw these story tiles and play these various cards to try and mitigate their effects. You also need to get certain symbols to get to the end of the board and get onto the next one. It's quite tricky. You really need to get to know these game boards to play it well and stop those horrible things happening. There's a timer here as well, and as that goes on, horrible things happen to you. There are items and characters from the books. Here's Sauron, of course. Here are the hobbitses, and the little hobbitses go on their way, getting more and more corruption, and Sauron gets closer and closer to them, and when they hit together, it's all over for the hobbits. There is player elimination in this game, so you really have to protect the ring bearer and try not to get eliminated. Frodo can use the ring, of course, and try and survive that way. To be honest with you, I've only played this a couple of times. This is the recent edition, or the last edition from Fantasy Flight Games, but it is a really good game. I don't know how Rainer Knizia managed to balance all the things that are going on in this game. He's a very clever designer. It's definitely still worth getting Lord of the Rings by Rainer Knizia, and it's still a very enjoyable game. And of course, you've got my rules summaries here to help you play it. Next up, I've got Lord of the Rings, The Confrontation, also by Rainer Knizia. This game owes a little bit to Stratego, the old toy game, and it's a lot of fun, a really good two-player game. Let's have a look. Lord of the Rings, The Confrontation, also by Rainer Knizia, a very clever designer. It's a two-player game, and you can see when you look at the board the influence of Stratego, that old game, in that you cannot see what's on the other side of the opponent's pieces. So it's very, very clever. You've got hidden powers, you don't know what's going on, and the idea is to get to the other side of the board. Obviously, the ring has to get to Mordor, so Frodo has to get to Mordor over here, and the shadow has to either get to the Shire or kill Frodo. Now, each one of these pieces only gets to move one space per turn, but of course, if two pieces end up in the same space, there's some combat, and you then move to this deck of cards here. Now, you have a set number of cards with a few special abilities, but just a set series of numbers. So once you play a card, that card is played until you go through all of the cards. So it is a matter of keeping track of what cards you've got left, deciding when to play them, keeping track of the opponent's cards and which ones they've played. And this makes it very strategic and very interesting. I'll just excuse those Conan figures over there. Now, of course, it doesn't stop there. The pieces have special powers as well. They have special abilities, and there are some very interesting combos between pieces. So it's a matter of getting your pieces in the right place to battle the other pieces. And very entertaining stuff. It's that mixture of powers versus powers that make it a really interesting game. I absolutely love this game. I think it's the perfect two-player game. It gets better and better as you get to know it better. And also there are some variant powers as well. So this is my summary, and you can see there's a variant game with a whole different set of characters and powers that you can try out. The rules are very simple. You can see they just are on this one sheet that I've summarized here, one side of a sheet. There's no luck. Very strategic, very interesting. A great game. Highly recommend you grab a copy of this game and add it to your collection if you like two-player games. Lord of the Rings, The Confrontation. Okay, I'm going to jump forward a little bit in time now and go to Lord of the Rings, the card game by Fantasy Flight Games. I've played quite a lot of this, but usually just as a solo game. I really enjoy it as a solo game, and I find myself coming back to it after taking breaks and really enjoying it and getting into it again, because it's quite a challenge as a solo gamer. So let's have a look inside this box. The Lord of the Rings, the card game, also by Fantasy Flight. All of these have been by Fantasy Flight so far. They've done a lot of Lord of the Rings games or republished Lord of the Rings games made by other people. This is a stunning living card game that they created themselves. This is only one box. I actually have 2 boxes worth of cards. There are just so many expansions and scenarios for this game. I really can't imagine how many cards have been released so far. But this is enough to keep me going. The thing about this game is that it's individual scenarios. So the individual scenarios are run by a card deck, and they add new elements all the time, and the actual scenarios vary a lot in the way they work. It's ingenious. What you have is a player card deck, and of course there's all kinds of deck building fun that goes into that as you work out your optimum deck. You've got a number of heroes here, and then you've got an encounter deck, which is basically the horrible stuff that is about to happen to you. This is the series of quest cards that you have to go on. Living card game players will recognise this mechanic in quite a few of these type of games, where you're going through a series of quest type cards. It's in the Arkham Horror card game, is a bit like that as well. These ones give you instructions for how many cards go out and what happens. But usually there's a certain number of cards being drawn every turn that you have to deal with. And you can see monsters come out like this. Here's a couple of trolls. Sometimes they're dictated by the scenario when these things come out. But they will attack you, of course, and you'll be spending resources to buy allies and attachments for your heroes, and fighting monsters, and also travelling to locations. You can get a certain number of travel tokens on each of these cards to get through, and these are the tokens here. Place them on the cards and try and get through. Now, of course, as the cards are coming out, there's a combined threat value. You can travel to certain locations to mitigate this threat. and try and cut down the threat value that you have to deal with each turn. But of course you have a limited amount of threat it's kept track of on this tracker here. Of course this keeps going down and down as the threat remains after you've been trying to deal with it. And you do get better at this game. It is very tough sometimes, hard to beat. But I do recommend that you get more than the core set. The core set scenarios aren't very good, don't give you a really good idea of the game. If you start getting into some of the expansions, you'll really discover how much better this game is when you play those scenarios. I really enjoy this game as a one-player game, as a solo game. I have played it with a couple of players and it was fine, and it's fun sort of cooperating, but of course the difficulty level goes up as you have more players. I think it's a great solo game. In fact, really the perfect solo game. You've got to sit down and work out a great deck and try and beat some of these scenarios. Some are a lot tougher than others, but when you beat those tough scenarios, you get a real sense of satisfaction. So, Lord of the Rings, the card game. Great for solo, very thematic, very fun, highly recommended, especially if you like solo games. That's it. Of course, it's not really Lord of the Rings, it is The Hobbit, but I thought I'd throw in a look at the Battle of 5 Armies. Fantastic game from the makers of War of the Ring. It is, of course, the battle at the end of The Hobbit, realised here in amazing detail by Armies, the makers of War of the Ring. Here's the board. You can see it's where it all happened at the Lonely Mountain, which is over here in the corner. We've got the ruins of Dale, destroyed by Smaug, of course. We've got orc hordes flooding in from this corner, and goblins as well coming in from the mountains. Everyone else defending the humans, the elves, the dwarves, etc. It really is a beautiful game. And you can see the pieces are pretty stunning. You've got some of the sculpts are reused from Lord of the Rings. Some are new. We've also got lots of little character pieces as well. There's Bjorn the bear. We've got some eagles here. And what are these? These are dwarves, of course. Elves and all the characters, Gandalf, etc. Quite a few decks of cards. Here are the bad guys, orcs and goblins. More cards over here. These are my foam core inserts, of course. Dice. We've got a little template here when Gandalf wants to cast a spell or someone wants to shoot an arrow, which is a nice little thing. Lots of counters. It uses the same kind of dice system from War of the Ring, which is where you roll dice and you get certain symbols that let you take certain actions. But there's a more involved system for bringing in the different characters. There's all the characters here, and they have special abilities, and you can bring them in. The Free People's characters are placed along this fate track, and they come in at different stages of the game. The bad guys, of course, are swarming in from the corner here, and you can see here they are here. Oh, these are silica gel things I put into my game sometimes just to soak up any moisture that appears in the game. Oh, this bag also I got on Etsy. It's got a lovely Lonely Mountain map on it. Very nice indeed. Inside there I've got my fate tiles. Here we've got the special bad guy who is called Bolg, who's the only special character for the evil side. It's a really complex, tactical, challenging, satisfying game. Really fantastic. I should definitely get it to the table far more often because it's a lot of fun. It's, sort of like War of the Ring without the complexity of the fellowship part, but also the battling is more interesting. There's an interesting system of kind of wound tiles to keep track of your wounds, and then you have to sort of deal with your casualties after the battle, which is kind of weird, but an interesting strategic thing. And it's, what can I say? It's just a great game if you like this kind of deep battle game. So, Battle of the 5 Armies, a beauty. One of the newer games that's come out is Hunt for the Ring, also by Armies Games, who made War of the Ring. And this is a hidden movement game. It's quite interesting. Let's have a look. Hunt for the Ring, also by Armies Games, who, let's face it, are the Lord of the Rings experts. This one's a hidden movement game, and the Nazgul are chasing those hobbits from Bag End to Rivendell. And as you can see, it's a two-sided board because this is a two-phase game. There's two sort of separate games that you can play together in one sitting, or play one and then store your pieces and play the other half sometime later. And they're slightly different in play. It's a very interesting idea and makes for a long and involved experience. Now the hobbits will be moving secretly, of course, and what you have is you slide a piece of paper into this and you can write the locations that you're visiting through these holes, and then you put that into this screen so you can see your map and work out your secret path. Now, of course, at the same time, the Nazgul, who are the other players, are trying to hunt you. Gandalf can help you out. You can also take corruption if necessary, but obviously you don't want to take too much corruption. And you have to also allow for the second part of the game because you'll be continuing right on from the first part. So if you stuff things up too much at the start, you're really going to be in trouble. Now, one thing about this game is that it has these very distinctive miniatures. They're busts of the Nazgul sitting on bases, and there's one of Gandalf there as well. And they're very unusual. Remind me a bit of the old game Trouble I had when I was growing up, these brightly coloured bases. I haven't quite worked out if I actually like them or not, but they certainly do stand out on the board and are easy to see. Perhaps if I paint the tops of them, they'll look a bit better. You've also got some special dice, cards, allies that you can play during the game. It's a really interesting game. I have to admit, though, that I've only played the first part. I haven't got onto the second part yet. I absolutely loved it, enjoyed it. It was very atmospheric. But then I got distracted by other things and I haven't been back to the second part of the game. So another game that I really have to get onto the table more often and get to know, because there's a lot here to enjoy. As you can see, it's beautifully produced, as Ares games always do, and I really enjoyed it. As a hidden movement game, it was fantastic. It was very tense. I felt like Frodo was being haunted by the Nazgul and that the terror was really quite real and that the threat of corruption was quite real. So very, very thematic and enjoyable. So if you like hidden movement games, you really should grab this one. I think it's a beauty. And of course, to finish off, it's time for the granddaddy of them all. Oh! The War of the Ring Collector's Edition! Well, folks, here it is. War of the Ring, the Collector's Edition. The pride of my collection. I've got quite a few games in this room, but this is the granddaddy of them all. I absolutely love it. I played it more than any other game in my collection, and I just think it's brilliant. Here's the anniversary edition of the rulebook. So some lovely hard-covered books there, and that came with also the anniversary edition board, which is in here, in there, or actually maybe it's in the box. I'm not sure. I've moved them around. But I usually use the anniversary edition board because I think it's slightly nicer. I've also got expansions galore. There's the Warriors of Middle-earth Collector's Edition. There's also the Lords of Middle-earth Collector's Edition here. So they come with all the pre-painted miniatures. I've got two different tins. One for the Fellowship player, one for the Shadow player. All my cards are sleeved, of course. And of course, here it is. The thing I love the most, my Collector's Edition. Now, when this first came out, I thought, oh, I can't possibly afford that. It was about $650 US at the time, and that didn't include the crazy shipping all the way to Sydney, Australia, where I was living. So I thought, oh, that's an impossible dream. And then later on, I actually stumbled across someone who wanted to sell their copy, and they sold it to me for a reasonable amount, more than the original cost, but not too much more, and I didn't have to ship it. So I was very, very lucky to get my hands on a copy. And as you can see, oh, it's a beast. Now, it's very important not to open this lid more than 90 degrees, otherwise you might damage that hinge. So I can't really do this with one hand while I'm holding the camera. Let's see if I can just... There we go. So, this is what you get. Of course, there are my own summary sheets, which I've been working on for years and perfecting. We've got the board, and then we've got a whole lot of miniatures. Now, oh, you're looking, well, hold on, they're unpainted. What's going on? I recently played Battle of the Five Armies, and I swapped the unpainted ones from Battle of the Five Armies just while I was playing that game. So rest assured, this is usually full of painted miniatures. Nothing weird going on there. So all the pieces are in there, and it's looks great on the shelf, though it does take up a huge amount of space. Now, War of the Ring is an incredible game. If you haven't played it before, the Shadow player tends to do a very battle-oriented game. He's trying to take over the lands of Middle-earth. At the same time, the Fellowship player is trying to survive those battles and also get the ring to Mordor. And the Fellowship is going all the way from Rivendell to Mordor, to the Crack of Doom, and trying to pop the ring into the Crack of Doom and thus save the day. So it's very challenging on two levels. You have this macro level, which is all about the battles, and then you have this micro level where it's about the Fellowship trying to get to Mordor. So it's fascinating and incredibly thematic. You can explore all kinds of scenarios, and the reason is because all these cards here reference all the events in the book, and they can be played either as event cards or as combat cards. So there's a constant push and pull with the cards about whether you want to play them for their special abilities or you want to play them in combat, because it's very important to be pretty strong in combat. So many choices. It's a long game. It'll probably take you about 3 or 4 hours, probably 4 hours, and but you'll be fully immersed all the time. I highly recommend it. I do more than highly recommend it. If you like games, you really should have a copy of War of the Ring. So yeah, there you go. I'm just going to say it. That's it, folks. A look at Lord of the Rings themed games. A fantastic suggestion by Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. Really appreciate your support, mate. And thank you to everyone who supports the Esoteric Order of Gamers, orderofgamers.com. Happy gaming, everybody, and I'll see you next time. In the meantime, go and enjoy some Lord of the Rings themed games. And remember, keep it secret, keep it safe.